Paragraph 2 of Article 294, Robbery with Rape. As regards the special complex crime of robbery with rape, the law uses the phrase, when the robbery shall have been accompanied by rape. But like in robbery with homicide, the offender must have the intent to take the personal property belonging to another, with intent to gain, and such intent must precede the rape. Rape committed on the occasion of robbery. This is usually committed when, while the robbers are ransacking the personal property in the house, the other is raping a woman in the same house. Even if rape was committed in another place, it's still robbery with rape. In a case where two of the offenders compelled two women living in the house where the robbery was committed to go with them, and while on the way to the place where they had their bangka hidden, the two men separated themselves from the hand and took the two women to a place near the river where, through force and intimidation, they raped them. Thereafter, the two men left the women and joined their companions. Ruling robbery with rape was committed. It's not necessary that the rape be committed prior to or simultaneous with the robbery. So the law says in the definition of the crime that when the robbery is accompanied by rape or mutilation. Take note that if the rape is committed against a woman in a house other than that where the robbery is committed, the rape should be considered as a separate crime. Rape was committed before taking of personal property. The intention of the culprits from the beginning was to take personal property. Even if rape was committed before the taking of the rice and the chickens, they were guilty of robbery with rape. Rape was not their primary objective. There is no such crime as robbery with attempted rape. Article 294, paragraph 2, which punishes the robbery with rape, a consummated rape, does not cover robbery with attempted rape. The crime cannot be a complex crime of robbery with attempted rape under Article 48 because robbery cannot be a necessary means to commit attempted rape, nor attempted rape to commit robbery. Both crimes cannot be a result of a single act. When taking of personal property of a woman is an independent act of the act following the defendant's failure to consummate the rape, there are two distinct crimes committed: attempted rape and theft. In People versus Vienna, facts of the case: A suddenly grabbed B, a woman, by the shoulder, pushed her to the side of the road, which was covered by tall talahib grass, and B shouted for help, tenaciously resisting the assault. A embraced her, took hold of her body, placed his hand around her neck, and gave her a fist blow on the right cheek, just below the eye. B fell to the ground face upward. Thereupon A sat on her legs, pulled her dress upwards. He attempted to loosen her drawers, which were tightly tied around her waist with a piece of cloth. Unsuccessfully, he attempted to pull the drawers downward. All along, A kept on kissing and embracing B, who continued offering resistance. B was able to release her legs. She kicked A, as a result of which the latter loosened his hold on her. B was able to stand up. It was while B was in the act of running away that A snatched her vanity case from her hand. Ruling the crime at bar is not one of robbery with rape, especially and specifically penalized under Article 294, paragraph 2 of the RPC. Article 48 of the RPC does not find application in the instant case because we are not here confronted with a single act which constitutes two or more grave or less grave felonies, and the attempted rape is not a necessary means of committing the theft or vice versa. The theft was committed as an independent act following the appellant's failure to consummate the rape. The lower court is correct in declaring the two crimes are committed by the appellant, namely attempted rape and theft. Additional rapes committed on the same occasion as robbery will not increase the penalty. There are cases holding that the additional rapes committed on the same occasion as robbery will not increase the penalty. In People versus Martinez, accused Martinez and two other unidentified persons who remained at large were charged with the special complex crime of robbery with rape, where all three raped the victim. The court imposed the penalty of death after considering two aggravating circumstances, namely nocturnidad and the use of deadly weapon. However, the court did not consider two rapes as aggravating, holding that the special complex crime of robbery with rape has therefore been committed by the felonious act of the appellant and his cohorts, with all acts of rape on that occasion being integrated in one composite crime. There are likewise cases which held that the multiplicity of rapes committed could be appreciated as an aggravating circumstance, where 3 of the 4 armed men who robbed the victim alternately raped her twice. For each of them, the court, citing People versus Obtinalia, ruled that the characterization of the offense as robbery with rape, however, is not changed simply because there were several rapes committed. The multiplicity of rapes should be instead taken into account in raising the penalty to death. It should be noted that there is no law providing that additional rapes or homicides should be considered as aggravating circumstances. The enumeration of aggravating circumstances under Article 14 of the RPC is exclusive, as opposed to the enumeration in Article 13 of the same code regarding mitigating circumstances, where there is a specific paragraph in Article 10 providing for analogous circumstances. It is true that additional rapes or killings in case of multiple homicide on the occasion of rape would result in an anomalous situation, where from the standpoint of the gravity of the offense, robbery with one rape would be on the same level as robbery with multiple rapes. However, the remedy lies with the legislature. A penal law is liberally construed in favor of the offender, and no person should be brought within its terms if he is not clearly made so by the statute. When the taking of property after rape is not with intent to gain, there is neither theft nor robbery committed. If rape was the primary objective of the accused and his taking of the jewels of the victim was not with intent to gain, but just to have some tokens of her supposed consent to the coercion, the accused committed 2 distinct crimes of rape and unjust fixation. Civil liability for robbery with rape. In case of robbery with rape, the accused should pay the offended party the value of the stolen property and indemnify the offended woman for damages. The civil liability for rape and robbery with rape has been set at 50,000 pesos. If the accused is married, he should be sentenced also to support the offspring, but not to acknowledge the offspring on account of his marriage status, when rape and homicide coexist in the commission of robbery. When the accused committed robbery in a house, killed the head of the family there, and raped his wife in the rice field to which he has been taken, the crime is robbery with homicide and rape under paragraph 1 of Article 294, the rape to be considered as an aggravating circumstance only. The trial court correctly designated the crime as robbery with homicide, with rape being considered as an aggravating circumstance. In the 2 instances when the assailants struck, their overriding intention was to commit robbery. After the children had been hog-tied in the Simasyo's premises, one of the armed men demanded money and jewelry. Thereafter, they started to ransack the house. When the husband of Zenaida arrived, the robbers went out and promptly killed him and his luckless companions. In the house of Zamoy, all the male companions were asked to come out first. Only then did the men begin to ransack the place. After ransacking the house, the male occupants were shot to death. As for the rapes committed, then the trial court was correct in treating the raping of Elvira Samoy and Zenaida Simasyo as an aggravating circumstance. Robbery with serious physical injuries under Article 263, Paragraph 2, Article 294, Paragraph 3. In a case, the accused assaulted the victim and robbed him of 17 pesos. The victim lost the hearing on one ear as a result of one of the blows he received from the accused. The Supreme Court held that the accused was guilty of robbery under Article 294, Paragraph 3, of physical injuries inflicted being covered in Article 263, Paragraph 2. Note, this ruling is inconsistent with the ruling in the case of People versus Hernandez as regards the crime of serious physical injuries committed. In that case, it was held that the offended party may still hear through his left ear. The case falls under 263, Paragraph 3. Had the ruling been the same as in the case of Hernandez, the case of robbery would have been punished under Article 294, Paragraph 4. Robbery with unnecessary violence and intimidation, Paragraph 294, Paragraph 4. Article 294, Paragraph 4, the tying of the victim after wounding him and leaving him tied to the trunk of a tree on a craggy ground after taking his money constitutes unnecessary violence and intimidation, referred to in Paragraph 4 of Article 294. The violence need not result in serious physical injuries. All that the first clause in Paragraph 4294 requires is that the violence be unnecessary for the commission of the robbery. When the violence or intimidation is necessary, paragraph 4 of 294 is not applicable. Although one of the victims was bound and beaten with the butt of a gun, this would not constitute unnecessary violence under paragraph 4 of Article 294 because it appears that the beating was for the purpose of compelling him to show the place where he kept his money, something he refused to do at first, and which the robbers would not have been able to ascertain had they not resorted to the violence. Inflicting serious physical injuries defined in subsections 3 and 4 of Article 263 upon any person not responsible for its commission. Suppose that in the course of the execution of the crime of robbery, one of the offenders inflicted upon another robber who wanted to get all the loot physical injuries which resulted to the latter's deformity. Is the crime robbery with serious physical injuries? Note that the wording of the law as regards this question, it says, upon any person not responsible for its commission. It would seem that the penalty prescribed in paragraph 4 of Article 294 should not be applied. The offender who inflicted on another robber physical injuries which later resulted in deformity would be liable for 2 crimes, namely 1. Robbery and 2. Physical injuries under 263 paragraph 3. Serious physical injuries defined in subdivisions 3 and 4 of Article 263 inflicted in connection with the robbery must be inflicted in the course of its execution. Hence, the victim became deformed or lost any other part of his body or the use thereof. He became ill or incapacitated for his work for more than 90 days, penalized under Article 263 paragraph 3, or became ill or incapacitated for labor for more than 30 days, penalized under 263 paragraph 4, it is necessary to determine whether the physical injuries were inflicted in the course of the execution of the robbery. If they were inflicted after the taking of the personal property had been completed, the serious physical injuries mentioned should be considered as a separate crime. In paragraph 4 of Article 294, the phrase by reason is not used. Requisites of robbery under the second paragraph of paragraph 4, Article 294. 1. That any of the physical injuries defined in paragraph 3 and 4 of Article 263 was inflicted in the course of the robbery, and 2. That any of them was inflicted upon any person not responsible for the commission of the robbery. Robbery with the use of violence against or intimidation on any person under paragraph 5 of Article 294. The robbery under this paragraph is known as simple robbery because the use of violence against any person does not result in homicide, rape, intentional mutilation, or any of the serious physical injuries defined in Article 263, which may give rise to special complex crime. When the injury inflicted upon the offended party on the occasion of the robbery can be qualified only as less serious physical injuries or slight physical injuries, the crime is that defined and penalized in paragraph 5 of Article 294. There is violence if the physical force employed by the offender merely constitutes in pushing the victim. Violence or intimidation need not be present before or at the exact moment when the object is taken. Violence or intimidation may enter at any time before the owner is finally deprived of his property. This is so because asportation is a complex fact, a whole divisible into parts, and a series of acts in the course of which the personal violence or intimidation may be injected. Thus, where a person picked the pocket of another who became aware of it, tried to recover his property, but the companion of the theft prevented him by using force and violence, the crime committed is robbery because violence was used before the owner is finally deprived of the property. Robbery with violence or intimidation in other cases referred to in paragraph 5 is committed by 1. Snatching money from the hands of the victim and pushing her to prevent her from recovering the seized property, and 2. Grabbing the pawn tickets from the hands of another and intimidating him. When the act of snatching a thing from his hands did not constitute in violence is against the person of the offended party, the crime of robbery is not committed. In a case where the accused snatched from behind the bag which the offended party was then carrying, it was held that there is no violence against the offended party immediately before, after, or at the time the bag was snatched from her. The accused was not liable of robbery but only for theft. There is nothing in the evidence to show that some kind of violence may be exerted to accomplish the snatching, and the offended party herself admitted that she did not feel anything at the time her watch was snatched from her left wrist. The crime committed is not robbery but only simple theft. Intimidation exists in the following cases. 1. When the complainant was on her way home after selling a ring in the market, Sophie pointed a revolver at her, while Cruz poked her back with a hard object. When Cruz and Demalanta pretended to be peace officers apprehending her for unlawfully dealing with U.S. Army goods and pointing to her a bag with such goods which they themselves had brought along, with the result that the complaint gave them 200 pesos. 2. The accused, in a guerrilla uniform, told the complainant to hand him all his money and personal belongings, and when the complainant replied he had no money, the accused told him to stand up and search his watch pocket, from which he took 40 pesos in paper currency. The complainant allowed the accused to search him because the accused was armed. The accused kept on pushing him back and forth and looked as if he was going to strike him. It was held that the acts performed by the accused in their nature inspired the victim with fear and restricted and hindered the free exercise of his will. 3. Even if the quarrel had arisen from some personal disagreement, the act of the defendants in threatening to kill the offended party with a deadly weapon and taking his personal property which they later misappropriated constitutes robbery. Intimidation exists when the acts executed or words uttered by the offender are capable of producing fear in the person threatened. In robbery with intimidation, there must be acts done by the accused, which, either by their own nature or by reason of the circumstances under which they are executed, inspire fear in the person against whom they are directed. Indeed, the trial court admitted that such threatening acts or words had not been proven when it stated in the decision appealed that in situations like this, it is not necessary that the actual acts or words of threats or intimidation be employed. That the complainant himself was positive that the fear that the accused judge might change the decision should he not give the sum allegedly demanded only occurred to his mind or came to himself alone. In other words, as the companion has admitted, only his thoughts put fear in him. His fear was not inspired by any threats, either by spoken words or gestures employed by the accused. The fright of him who is robbed must be under the law and objective fright, as contradistinguished from the subjective fright. It must have been due, in short, to some act on part of the accused and not arise from the mere temperamental timidity of the person whose property happens to be stolen from his person or presence. Statutes defining crimes of extortion and providing punishment, therefore, must be read together, and fear, within statute defining the term as obtaining of property from another with this consent induced by fear, must be induced by threats, and hence threat is necessary ingredient of the crime. In robbery with the intimidation of persons, the intimidation consists in causing or creating a fear in the mind of the person, or in bringing in a sense a mental distress in view of risk or evil that may be in pending reality or in imagination. Such fear of injury to person or property must continue to operate on the mind of the victim at the time of the delivery of the money, or the complainant knew of the plan laid down from the entrapment of the accused, at the same time participating in the execution thereof, and he delivered the money to the accused, not from fear, but for the purpose of bringing the accused to justice. The accused is not liable for robbery with intimidation of persons. Threats to extort money distinguish from robbery through intimidation. In both crimes, there is intimidation of the offender. The purpose when threat is made to extort money is identical, to obtain gain. What are the difference of robbery through intimidation and threats to extort money? 1. In robbery, intimidation is actual and immediate, whereas in threats, intimidation is conditional or future, that is not immediate. 2. In robbery, intimidation is personal, while in threats, it may be through an intermediary. 3. In threats, the intimidation may refer to the person, honor, or property of the offended party or that of his family, while in robbery, the intimidation is directed only to the person of the victim. 4. In robbery, the gain of the culprit is immediate, whereas in threats, the gain of the culprit is not immediate. Robbery with violence is distinguished from grave coercion. 1. In both crimes, there is violence used by the offender, and 2. While in robbery, there is intent to gain, such element is not present in coercion. The only distinction between these two crimes is just a matter of intention. If the purpose of the accused in taking somebody's property by force or intimidation is to obtain gain, the crime is robbery. But if its purpose is to compel another to do something against his will, without authority of the law, but believing himself to be the owner or the creditor and thereby seize his property, then the crime is grave coercion. Problem. A lost his watch. One day A saw B using the watch. A recognized the watch, asked B to give it to him because it was his property. Because B refused, A, with the drawn pistol, told him that if B would not give him the watch, A would kill him. Because of this fear for his life, B gave the watch to A against B's will. Is the crime committed by A robbery, grave threats, or grave coercion? It is grave coercion because B was compelled to do something against his will, whether it be right or wrong. It cannot be threats because in the crime of threats, the intimidation is not actual and immediate. It is true that there was a sort of condition made, that is, B would be killed if he would not give A the watch, but in threats, intimidation must promise some future harm or injury. When the effect of intimidation is immediate and the offended party is compelled thereby to do something against his will, thereby it be right or wrong, the crime committed is grave coercion. It cannot be robbery because there is no intent to gain, as A believed that the watch he was taking was his own property. Robbery and bribery distinguished. 1. It is robbery when the victim did not commit a crime and he is intimidated with arrest and or prosecution to deprive him of his personal property. It is bribery when the victim has committed a crime and gives money or gift to avoid arrest or prosecution. The reason is when the victim did not commit any crime, there is nothing that would have required a public officer to exercise his duty or function. On the other hand, if the victim committed a crime and the public officer accepted bribe, the latter thereby agreed to refrain from doing something which it was his official duty to do. Thus, where an agent of authority took away from its owner a word against his will, one fish valued at 10 pesos, making the threat that if he would not give to him the fish, he would be taken to the headquarters to explain why he was selling fish caught by means of dynamite, and because of the threat, he gave the fish to the agent, although the fish was not caught by means of dynamite. The crime committed is under paragraph 5 Article 294. If the owner of the fish in that case in fact used dynamite in the catching the fish and he gave the fish to the agent to avoid prosecution under the Fishers Act, the crime would be bribery. 2. In robbery, the crime is deprived of his money or property by force or intimidation, and bribery, he parts with his money or property in a sense voluntary. When it's not certain that the victim committed the crime. When it is not certain that the victim committed the crime. The accused was a sanitary inspector who inspected the merchandise in the store of the offended party. The accused found a blackish substance in the lard. The accused demanded 2 pesos from the offended party, accompanied by the demand of threats of arrest and prosecution. Ruling: the principal distinction between the two offenses is that in bribery, the transaction is mutual and voluntary. In the case of robbery, the transaction is neither voluntary nor mutual, but is consummated by the use of force or intimidation. If the offended party in the present case had voluntarily offered to pay the defendant 2 pesos, the transaction would have constituted bribery. But such is not in this case. The defendant demanded the payment of 2 pesos accompanied by the demand with threats of arrest and prosecution, and therefore guilty of robbery.